Welcome everybody to tonight's May 18th City of Wildwood's Planning and Zoning Commission. On tonight's agenda, we have two public hearings and we have one old business item, and that basically wraps it up. So I'd like to first have a roll call of commission members.
Commissioner Helfrey.
Here.
Commissioner Levitt. Commissioner Cohn.
Here.
Commissioner Gragnani.
Here.
Commissioner Beatty.
Here.
Commissioner Doppler.
Here.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Chair Lee.
Present.
Councilmember Werther.
Present.
Mayor Bolin.
Here.
Moving on, for the approval of the minutes of May 4th. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Commissioner Helfrey, motion. A second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Commissioner Gragnani, second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Minutes are approved.
Thank you.
Does the department have any opening remarks?
Mr. Chair, I do not tonight, so thank you.
Okay, great. We'll move on to the public comment session. Travis, do we have any speaker cards?
Mr. Lee, with 3 in attendance, I would just like to take a second to give the folks who are in attendance the opportunity to use the raise hand feature if they would like to address the commission during the public comment session.
Okay,
And that
we'll
would
wait.
in the participant window, and then at the bottom of the window on the side would be the option to raise your hand if you'd like to speak. And if we could just wait a few seconds on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not seeing anyone raising their hands.
Doesn't seem like it. Okay. So we have 2 public hearings, and I do not have the agenda for the public hearing. Did you send it to me?
I did email it to you this afternoon, but I have it here
Okay.
with me.
No, wait, hang on. I can get it if I can get it. There are multiple things on here. There we go. The agenda. All right, did you do that?
I sent it to your, not your city issued email, but the
The other one? Okay, I can do that. Got it. All right, here we go. All right, here's the public hearing script. In the city of Wildwood, public hearings are truly intended to accept comments and questions concerning these items. Since this is a public hearing, it is only intended to provide information on these requests. No action is planned on these items tonight, and consideration of them is to be taken no earlier than June 1st, 2020. City's Department of Planning will address the comments, questions, and concerns that are raised tonight and include them as part of their formal recommendations to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Public hearings are conducted as described in the handout provided on the table, which we haven't seen for a while. In the reception area, with information on these matters, the commission will allow all parties adequate time to present their position and ask that you respect all opinions by other speakers and avoid interrupting anyone during their time at the podium. Anyone wanting to speak or receive future information on this item should fill out speaker's card and leave it with Mr. Newbury. In addition, information on these items can be found on the city's website at www.cityofwildwood.com. Commission would like to thank you for your cooperation and participation in tonight's public hearings. So moving on, Mr. Newbury, are you going to read PZ 7-20?
Yes, sir. PZ 7-20, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request to review the current regulations and requirements associated with roof and ground-mounted solar panels and how such petitions for installations are processed by the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. The current regulations and requirements were approved by the City of Wildwood, Missouri in August 2014 and intended to ensure that such installations would have limited impacts on adjoining property owners and publicly owned sites, while also preserving important woodland areas and grand tree specimens within the community. These existing regulations and requirements are applicable in all residential zoning district designations, R districts, including the NU non-urban residence district, all wards.
Thank you, Mr. Newbury. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, before going over the primer that's been provided for your consideration tonight regarding this public hearing item, I do want to ask you to go back to January 6th of 2020. That was our first meeting of the new year. And at that time, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved a work program for the year 2020. That work program had a number of items associated with it, and those items were prioritized from the perspective of high, medium, and low priority. One of those items that was added by the Planning and Zoning Commission as part of their consideration of the work program was a review of solar panels and the city's current regulations for the same. So tonight, this public hearing is a function of the work program that's been adopted by the Planning and Zoning Commission. For the purposes of tonight's public hearing, the department has prepared the aforementioned primer. As with most public hearings initiated by the city regarding city regulations, ordinances, requirements, the department typically provides such. In this particular instance, the primer does describe why we are here tonight discussing solar panels, both roof and ground mounted types. It then goes on to describe the event, so to speak, that led to the desire of the city to institute greater requirements for solar panels, regardless of where they might be mounted or placed on a home or property, respectively. That incident or issue involved a ground-mounted solar panel. It was placed in close proximity to another person's home, and to accommodate it, trees were removed, a buffer line. All of this occurred illegally at the time, and ultimately the situation was corrected in terms of the location of the solar panels, but certainly the buffer, the trees, could not be restored to the size or crown diameter that existed at the time. It was that neighbor that was impacted by this illegal installation that decided to contact the city, provided the city with information from other communities around the region, and said we need to do more to protect people like her and her husband. As was mentioned in the advertisement, this process started in 2014, concluded in that same year. And beyond just the general requirements in all the R districts relative to setbacks, etc., new requirements were put into place to ensure that the city did have review authority over solar panels. As you know, it is a tiered review. If the solar panels are roof mounted, are not visible from a adjoining or adjacent street, then it is just processed as a permit application. However, if the solar panels are roof mounted or ground mounted, then they are a conditional use permit. And that requires a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission, multiple actions with regards to its members, and then finally, review by City Council. The reason I think we're here tonight to discuss possible alterations relates to the feedback we've gotten from a few of the property owners that have been subjected to a conditional use permit requirement. They have expressed concerns about the delays associated with the process. Instead of maybe a few weeks for a typical permit, it may go into 2 to 3 months now. I would note that we typically do a public hearing and then present a recommendation and take action all within the same, or all within 2 meetings instead of a typical 3 or 4 meeting situation. So we have tried through the years to expedite the consideration by combining when we can, and obviously where we can't, we don't.
Mhm.
So from the perspective of the department, we provided you the current regulations which relate to roof-mounted types. And then with ground-mounted types, the permit, the conditional use permit, can certainly address almost any and all types of circumstances. I do want to note that the department does feel strongly that the regulations are still necessary. And despite the delay it may cause an individual property owner over the course of time, they have proven to allow us to take closer looks, do a better job of analysis, and ultimately, I think at the end, provide a solid decision regarding their location, how they look, and any steps that need to mitigate them. So tonight, the department is here to hear the comments of the public and the commission members. If the commission wants to direct the department to reduce the number of requirements, then it will. If the commission wants to direct the department to increase them and address some of the circumstances we've seen, it will. Certainly the direction comes from the Planning and Zoning Commission, and Mr. Newbury and I are here tonight to listen. I will say one thing, if there are any questions, we'd be glad to try to address them at this time. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. I would like to start this off. The issue doesn't appear to be the solar panels or the restrictions that we may or may not place on it based upon visibility. But the question comes up, is it the people are unaware what the process is. So what I would like to do is find out, does the city of Wildwood have a frequently asked questions page or a building permit page that says solar panel application? We could split that up into 2 parts. You could have not visible to the streetscape on the rear facing roof planes of the house is mostly a staff review, and then any proposed solar panels that would be visible from the street or adjoining neighbors would require our permit process with the conditional use approval. And then maybe we post something online that says our conditional use approval process requires a public hearing, input, go through the whole steps. And we basically tell people they want to do ground mounted or roof mounted in the fronts of their houses, that it's going to take 3 to 4 months. And then we don't get the complaints because we've given them the knowledge of the process. I think sometimes the shock of the process is the issue. If they're complaining because they have to do the process, well, that's the ordinance. So, and I'm not proposing we change anything. I'm just saying, why don't we post something on our website that explains what our process is?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to let Mr. Newbury or Ms. Arnett answer that. Ms. Arnett updates our website regularly, and Mr. Newbury gets most of the calls when a solar panel array is determined to need a conditional use permit. So if you don't mind, I'm going to let those 2 speak in my behalf. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Lee, I'll start. I would just say that typically whenever there's a resident homeowner who'd like to put solar panels on their home or on their property in the instance of a ground mounted unit, the representative from the solar company typically handles that and contacts the city to see what the process is. And as Joe said, we describe to them the process as we do with any zoning request. And we still hear the feedback on the length of the process regarding the timeframes, even with the explanation. However, it would certainly be a good idea and a simple thing to add information to our website for folks to get to and learn about the process there as well.
Okay, my thought again is it takes it out of the subjective nature of someone calling and then having somebody explain it versus it's written down. And then if they call, you can confirm it and go from there. I mean, that's the process. That's what has to occur.
And I'll just add, we do have some of that information on there. We probably don't have it as specific as you're requesting, and I'm happy to add that. It's easy to do.
Okay.
And again, Mr. Chair, we can certainly do that. I don't think it would take a formal action of the Planning and Zoning Commission to do what you just described. I would suggest that if you want to consider as a Planning and Zoning Commission, we could go from a two-step process. Again, public hearing, then letter of recommendation. We could go to a one-step process. We have the public hearing, and at the conclusion of the public hearing, the department presents its draft recommendation report. Now, we've always avoided that because people might say, well, how would you know what my public comments were and still write a recommendation that's contrary to it or in support of it? We're making assumptions, so to speak. But the Planning and Zoning Commission is not obliged to act on that report if there is a lot of public comment that's contrary to the recommendation of the department. You could, as we've done in the past, postpone, direct the department to look into these comments and revise where necessary. So we could end up saving 2 to 4 weeks by doing it that way. So that's something for the commission members to consider. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Bolin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. First of all, relative to Joe's options that he just laid out, and we always appreciate options. That's what he does. I would encourage us not to go to a one-step process, even though, as Joe points out, I think that in theory, if not in some instances in practice, it could occur. I think the optics of that, of the public potentially thinking that their comments didn't matter because a resolute or a recommendation was already in place, even though I know that's not what we would be doing. I am a little concerned, actually very concerned about that. So I think the two-step process that we have, that we apply with other things, works here as well. And related to that, I don't believe that solar panels are typically an emergency situation where, if ever, frankly, where we have to have such immediate approval that we would need to shorten the process. So that's just an observation on that. Then I have a question for Joe. What is it, if anything, Joe, are you looking for the commission to do this evening relative to this particular item?
Well, since it is a public hearing, Mr. Mayor, tonight I'm just soliciting input, direction, questions, comments. The department will prepare a report, and one of the items that it is considering, and we reference it in the title of the advertisement, with the effort that you led regarding grand trees, I think we should add something into the context of the regulations relating to the tree preservation and restoration code to make it more clear, as Chair Lee has mentioned. Because as you know, with the item that we have on tonight's agenda, we had a couple of trees removed before the application, and we need to be able to address those in a more, I think, appropriate manner. So the department is looking at maybe 1 or 2 additions that it would like to offer to the commission.
And if I could continue, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
I just speaking as a commissioner, I would welcome those. I think that that's a good idea. in a general sense, I would just say with respect to this, it is evolving, and we've had several of these cases come before the commission, as the other commissioners in the meeting tonight know. And I think this is something that I would counsel that we, as we do with other things, but particularly with this, take baby steps and not get to a point where we are allowing results that are unintended. These are very particularized to their location, to the visibility of the panels, to the neighbors, to the streets. And this was thought through quite extensively when the previous ordinance was passed. And so I just think we need to be very careful as we move forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bolin. Commissioner Scott.
Guess Jackson.
Jackson. Okay.
So I read through the submittal and it does cover the aesthetics. I would say that the existing process seems fine to me and fair. So I agree with that. What I don't see in there, outside of possibly being where that paragraph on the St. Louis County, where the St. Louis County requirements, it might capture that, and I did not have time to look that up. But I'm concerned about adding certain requirements. We had the last meeting where making sure there's disconnects for public safety as a requirement. 2, you are now generating energy, and there's a maintenance that goes with that. Now, I don't know all the maintenance. I know I don't like to see batteries put in the back 40, right? Because when you can get those certified that you've turned in your batteries, no different than a vehicle battery at AutoZone. You can take them oftentimes to Walmart. They have to accept batteries. Make sure that's a requirement so batteries are not laying out on the landscape. But I would suggest that Joe and the team look at general maintenance requirements and how that those are requirements that if you are going to start producing energy, that you have those. And I don't have an answer. I would just say I would look into that before the final submittal. And that's all my comment is.
Mayor Bolin.
Actually, Commissioner Beatty is before me.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Beatty.
My main concern about the ordinance that we have is that it's, in my opinion, it's kind of discriminatory if your house faces the street any direction other than north. With the south-facing home, since you want south-facing exposure for maximum use out of the panels, the homes that are on the homes on the south side of the street would have that exposure most likely, but homes facing any other direction have to go through this public process to get their panels. And so that, to me, that's kind of a concern.
Mr. Boonich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to Commission Members Beatty's comments, it is a tiered process of consideration, and in tiering anything, there are those that will benefit from a fast review and those that are going to ultimately be experiencing more of a delay because of the process. I guess what I would say is, in the instances where we've had panels placed on the front of the dwelling facing a street, we've always been able to find a solution. And the solutions come through the permit process, which begins again with the public hearing, where people come from the neighborhood, express their concerns, and then the commission tries to find solutions to those concerns. So in almost all instances, we've approved the solar panels. We've just asked the property owner to take into consideration their neighbors. And so I don't know if it's bad or good, but it's worked.
And then a quick follow-up. So like just my house, for example, my house faces west and I've got north and south facing roofs. If I were to put solar panels on my roof on the south side, which is, it's basically one one big rectangle there. Would I need a permit, or would that be administrative only?
You would need a building permit, not
Or
necessarily.
I'm sorry, the public hearing.
Oh.
So south facing back of house, you can just go to
Would-
staff and they would
Well,
approve it.
it's the side of my side yard, which would face the south, so my next door neighbor could see it.
That would require a public hearing. And again, the reason we have this is for aesthetics. Okay, it has nothing to do with solar panels. It's aesthetics and our core issues of the woodland preservation, which would be the criteria for any home that would be built on a tract of land. It's the same thing under the review. And then if you go the next step and go above and beyond what is allowed by ordinance, you have to come see us and get a conditional use permit to get this approved. So I think our process is fine. I just think we need to tell our people that live in Wildwood that this is the process. If they click on the website and we have, solar panel system, these are the steps that you need to do. And you don't have to get too specific, but you have to give them an idea of what is required. Maybe they won't put them on the front of the house if they know they can get staff review on the back of the house only and save all the steps. I mean, that's just kind of what you want to do. Okay, so I have Mayor Bolin first, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, relative to providing information. I don't think we can ever go wrong with that. Also, with Commissioner Jackson's comments about, the issue being not only what goes into installing these, but the maintenance of it, wholeheartedly agree with that. This is not just a snapshot in time. And once these things are on a house or on the property, either way, there are maintenance issues that I think we may want to consider. And then relative to the comment about, which I definitely appreciate and respect relative to, how this could negatively affect some people whose homes don't face in certain directions. At the end of the day, unfortunately, many of our rules do have a different effect on people depending on where you live. I mean, for example, the natural resource protection boundaries. If you're not going to, purchase a home and live in an area where those apply, then they don't apply. And if you do, then that you got to deal with that. So I think as Joe pointed out, we as a city try to wrestle with these things and come up with the most equitable way to make these work for the interest of everyone involved. And so I think I would agree that we have a good ordinance and we just keep moving forward with some tweaks as has been suggested. Thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Greg Nye.
Yes, unless Mr. Vunich has something that he would like to say prior in response to the mayor's comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Gragnani. And I typically don't insert myself when a commission member has something to say, but just to Mr. Beatty's comments, typically we do not require a conditional use permit if it's just an intrusion, let's say on a neighbor's viewscape from the side or rear of their property. It's truly, we focus more so than anything, not solely, but more so than anything on the view from the street. And on certain corner lots, that's where we catch the sides of the dwelling or the sides of the roof associated with the dwelling. So, and not knowing your specifics, and I can certainly look at it before next meeting and answer this question more intelligently. I would say, I can't tell you if you need a permit or not. I'd have to look at it.
Commissioner Greg Nye.
Yes, I agree with pretty much everything that's been said. The mayor kind of summed it up previous to Mr. Vunich speaking. I do really think that we need to take small steps here. And I guess my initial question would be, how many people really and truly complain about the length of time? I mean, is it, 50% of the people who come in wanting to put up solar panels? Is it, 10%, or is it 70%? I think that makes a huge difference in what we're going to do here. But I also think that the regulations, other than what's come up tonight in terms of maintenance of the systems and proper disposal of the batteries when they're no longer have any useful life, I don't really see too much wrong with what we've got. And I would agree with adding, the Grand Tree ordinance into this, however it fits in there, and putting more information on the website. And one would think that, the people that are, if the people that are coming in to ask about it are actually the company that's selling the solar panels, that I can't imagine that they've not seen this in other cities. And I would assume that they're not really surprised about it. It may just be the homeowner who thinks it's a simple, building permit like you apply for to, to remodel a bathroom or something. So I think we need to be careful about this and do what's been said so far. I would be in total agreement. Thank you.
Mr. Vunich, anything? Otherwise, I'll move on to Commissioner Helfrey.
No, sir, but thank you.
Commissioner Helfrey?
Okay, so thank you. One of the things that I hope that we address is the tree. When you talk about the grand tree and you address that, one of the things would be addressing tree removal over time due to trees growing. I think that we had something like that happen or come up with some solar panels that we talked about addressing in West Glen Farms neighborhood. And so when we talk about addressing the grand trees, I would also like addressed, if they put these solar panels in one place, not to say in 5 years when the tree grows that, oh, they're gonna have to cut it down now because they put these solar panels there. I'm hoping that there can be some forward thinking with that. The other question I have is, what status do HOAs have when it comes to approving solar panels? Are they allowed to disapprove them at all? And if they are not, then do we need to have their approval or know what they require? So I'll hand off to you, Joe. Thank you.
It's a very good question, Commissioner Helfrey, and the current regulations specifically state compliance with all subdivision declarations, covenants, restrictions, or rules and regulations is required of any solar panel array installation. So we encourage the company or the property owner to contact their homeowners association and provide some type of verification prior to a final action being taken by the city.
So my hope is that not one of these would be approved then without a letter from the HOA approving it. So that they don't slip through the cracks, so that there's some uniformity there.
And I believe, and Mr. Newbury can correct me, we haven't done one since the adoption of the regulations in 2014 without that being in place.
So when you put together the frequently asked questions, that might be something to pop in there. Thank you.
You're welcome, and we will.
Commissioner Jackson. Commissioner Jackson?
Yeah, I had to take it off mute. Sorry, guys. Commissioner Agnani, I really respected everything that you said earlier. I just did a review on renewables. I found out since around the 2014, 2012-14, the component price of all the solar is 40% lower than it was back then. So the magic number of this magic 7-year return on investment in the business world and also the homeowner world means that it's now getting more viable for people to want to put solar and get a return on their investment. So I really wanted to say I applaud you as commissioners going back to January to get ahead of this, because it's going to come up more and more. More people are going to want to put solar. This is going to be an issue. And I just applaud that you're getting ahead of it. I just wanted to give a few numbers and facts as to why we're going to see more solar requests.
Mhm. One thing I would like to mention, if we do something with the maintenance and proper disposal, is batteries are just one component of the solar array. The entire array itself is a problem with the silicone and the carbon and the metals and so forth and the electronics that are in there. So if we're going to put in a disposal of the system, that it has to be disposed of properly. It cannot be dumped on site, and however we want to word it, but these things are going to become very expensive to remove and get rid of. You're not going to just be able to take this to the dump. As more of our technology components get recycled, it's all going to have to be recycled at some point in time. I definitely don't want to see a whole solar system in Cox Creek. Commissioner Gregani?
Yes, I have one additional question that I forgot about until just now. In reading through the background materials that were provided on this, one of the issues that I saw or I read was that in some cities, I guess, and they're doing solar easements and what have you. I'm certainly not advocating we get into that, because I see that as a huge problem in terms of actually enforcing it and what have you. But I guess in regard to that, I'm assuming that our ordinances and the state's ordinances and the county's ordinances, what have you, there is no way that someone who puts up a solar system can force a neighbor across the street to trim a tree or whatever if their tree starts blocking, the solar panels on the house that has them. Is there?
I'm going to let Mr. Young answer that question.
Well, I can never say that there's never a possibility that someone could argue it, but I'm not aware of any successful legal theories to require that.
Okay, thank you.
Did I catch everybody who wanted to speak? Mr. Vunich, I think that's it. Are you looking for a motion or anything, or?
Just a couple of things. First and foremost, thank you for all the input. It's very good. I started with a couple of items, and there's several things now beyond that Mr. Newbury and Miss Arnett and I will investigate. So thank you. It was a very successful hearing. And all I need in terms of a motion is to close the public hearing. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could interject, we do still have some folks in attendance, so if we would like to open that up if they'd like to speak. So again, with the chair's permission, I'll go through
Go ahead.
who are in attendance to tonight's meeting and would like to speak at this public hearing regarding solar panels. Use the raised hand feature on Zoom and the chair will acknowledge you.
I don't see anybody.
And Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time. So thank you for that.
I will move to close the public hearing then.
Okay, Commissioner Grignani, second by Commissioner Beatty. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? That public hearing is closed.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, Mr. Newbury, PZ 8-20.
PZ 8-20, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request to review and consider changes to the lists of permitted uses contained in all R residential C and M zoning district designations of the City of Wildwood zoning ordinance. including the NU non-urban residence district, for the purposes of ensuring the mix of activities are still applicable and suitable for the locations where authorized or allowed. The applicable districts include the following sections of the code: Section 415.090, NU non-urban residence district, Section 415.110 R1 1 acre resident district regulations, Section 415.120 R1A residence district regulations, Section 415.130 R2 residence district regulations, Section 415.140 R3 residence district regulations, Section 415.150 R4 resident district regulations, Section 415.160 R6A residence district regulations, Section 415.170 C1 neighborhood business district regulations, Section 415.180, Section 415.180 C2 shopping district regulations, and Section 415.200 M1 industrial district regulations, all wards.
Thank you, Mr. Newbury. Mr. Vunich.
I'll get the buttons right, I promise. Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the second item for consideration tonight under the agenda public hearing is the request that Mr. Newbury just completed and read into the record. This too was on our 2020 work program and identified as a high priority. So again, the department is responding to the direction of the Planning and Zoning Commission and placing this item before the Planning and Zoning Commission for consideration. The department has also prepared a primer for use tonight in the discussion of this particular item by the Planning and Zoning Commission, the public, and city officials. In the primer, the department does acknowledge that many of the descriptions in the residential districts, including the NU non-urban resident district, have been with us for 25 to 30 to more years since their first being published and identified in a zoning ordinance. How can that be? The city of Wildwood is only 24 plus years of age. So how can we have descriptions that are over 25 years in age? Quite simply, much of our descriptions in terms of permitted and conditional uses were carryovers from St. Louis County, the previous jurisdiction in this area. Many have been changed, some have been removed, but all in all, there are still a good number of them that are carryovers, and in terms of their age or years in use, substantial. Additionally, in the primer, the department does note that times change, and certain uses that used to be located on every corner or in any major retail center, such as video stores, are no longer necessary, nor do they exist in any great number. Conversely, there are a number of new uses that have come along in more recent times, like shared workspaces or senior care facilities with a continuum of dwelling types, that being both independent, assisted, and skilled. These new uses are more so than anything the items for the department's consideration in its opinion regarding this matter. Trying to understand the economy that has occurred since the last recession, now COVID-19, the coronavirus, and ensuring that we reflect in our permitted and conditional uses the things that are happening in the economy and how best to address them to keep a vibrant town center and the services our residents need. Conversely, as mentioned, if there are uses identified under either permitted or conditional that no longer would be acceptable in Wildwood in 2020, or have gone the course and no longer are a component of a commercial area, a residential area, then those need to be addressed. And so tonight, the department's prepared the summary in the primer and has provided the districts that are subject to the consideration under this advertisement. And again, for the most part, are seeking the input of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I do want to draw one specific example. Over the last several weeks, a provider of senior care services, that continuum that I mentioned, both independent, assisted, and skilled, has expressed interest in the city of Wildwood. It's a large developer. They need, for their purposes, a larger parcel of ground. And certainly they've looked in the non-urban resident district area and found that based upon how they are treated under our permitted and conditional uses, the density of independent care is certainly a challenge. And so they are that group looking at Wildwood, but as it would stand now under our current definitions and requirements of permitted and conditional uses, could not proceed forward in the format that they've successfully used across the country. So that's a good example of why we're here tonight and why I believe the Planning and Zoning Commission identified this particular topic as a high priority in its 2020 work program. As with the previous public hearing, we are here to listen, to take notes, to do the research, and come back with responses and answers to all of your input that we received tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. I'll open the floor up for discussion. Commissioner Helfrey.
Sorry about that. Joe, how does this fall into line with what the Town Center Update team is doing with all of the different, what is allowed in what area?
I think there is a real parallel between the two. And I think the Town Center Update team's consideration of the list of uses should be also reviewed in the context of this hearing. And that if at all possible, we eliminate any potential conflicts. And certainly from a user's perspective, mirror the two between each other so there is an ease of use versus confusion. So very good question.
So, so then one thing that I would say would be that whatever we decide, I think that it can't really be finalized until we see what the Town Center Update team has to say. Would that be correct?
Certainly, if that's the direction the Planning and Zoning Commission would like to pursue in this regard, we can. As you know, we finished the discussion of the uses in Town Center before we kind of took our hiatus due to COVID-19, the coronavirus. And there's many ways to treat those. The department may suggest that we do not want to create a long list of permitted uses in each of our R districts and the non-urban district. It may not be necessary. We may be able just to reference the town center permitted uses in the appropriate district and then have that become an appendix in the zoning ordinance or vice versa, something akin to that. So there's many ways to treat it. But I think your point is well taken.
And then my next question for you would be, you gave examples of things that are kind of obsolete, like video stores, but things that are not appearing right now, such as you said, shared workspaces and so forth. So as you as the city, do you have a list of things that you think need to be addressed or specific items that should be changed?
I have some in mind. They need further research. That's why I didn't give you an extensive list, just citing a couple of examples. But certainly as we move forward and do the consideration for the benefit of the Planning and Zoning Commission, we'll have definitive ideas for you to consider.
Okay, my last question for now. I'm not saying forever, but just for now. would be, as far as this, the senior independent, the continuum living that you talked about, I guess I'm not knowledgeable enough to understand what we have now that we offer them that is something that would be more in line with what those types of businesses need. So I guess, could you draw a better picture for me of what the difference is? And then I'm done. Thank you.
In the opinion of the department, we do not have a continuum of care on a single campus. Stonecrest, now Anthology here in Town Center, is assisted and skilled, so to speak, and their occupancy is based upon a certificate of need issued by the state of Missouri, and it's done on not residential units or units, but beds. Conversely, the Meadows of Wildwood, which was to be more of a continuum of care, is just independent care. Quite frankly, it borders more on just a regular residential subdivision than anything. It is age restricted, so to speak, but certainly does not offer many of the services that a facility that offers continuum of care would. And so senior housing has always been somewhat of a point of discussion in Wildwood, but we have 2 facilities in Town Center, but for the most part, they don't offer the whole spectrum.
Mr. Vunish or Mr. Newbury, do you have that sheet that we used for the Town Center Update Committee that has the actual underlying zoning and the uses on that? It's a nice Excel sheet. That might be something worth looking at.
Well, I'm confident between Kathy and Mr. Newberry we can find it, but we'll certainly we'll send it over to tomorrow to all the commission members.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Grignani?
Yes, I was thinking about this today, and I was wondering whether or not it's, and I don't even know if it's possible, but the issues that we went through with the sign ordinances and changing all of the naming of all of the signs, whether in sort of an offshoot of that, rather than addressing specific uses where, like, video stores and grocery stores and, you know, whatever, we couldn't go to a more generalized topic or description of the use based upon the size of the building, the traffic that it, not like the people traffic and the car traffic, vehicular traffic that it would generate, so that we don't get into the issues of, you know, video rental stores, which obviously basically don't exist anymore. And you couldn't base your usage on more generalized descriptions, you know, in terms of size and like I said, the vehicular traffic and the foot traffic that they're going to generate, and not be so specific about what the actual use is. And I guess that's my only comment.
Commissioner Beatty?
I kind of want to second what Commissioner Grignani was saying, because what she's referring to sounds a lot like what I've heard referred to as form-based zoning, rather than the strict residential commercial separations. Because I don't know, from my understanding, a lot of these zoning ordinances started coming around to separate the big nasty industrial plants from the more residential areas. And nowadays that I don't know, one of my favorite things about when I go down into the city is being in a residential subdivision, then all of a sudden you come to like a little corner store and just in a a really random spot that, and stuff like that never seems to get built anymore. And maybe it's because of all the parking lots and stuff like that that we would require nowadays that weren't required 100 years ago. But yeah, as someone living in the town center, I would appreciate a little more intermixing of single family, multifamily, and even small commercial areas.
Mr. Beatty, we'll certainly take that into account as we review the list of permitted and conditional uses in each of the districts.
Mayor Bolen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't disagree with what Commissioners Beatty and Regnati have suggested relative to maybe what they're trying to achieve. The only caveat / reservation I might have is whether the movement to a more generalized approach based only on numerical data would in some way potentially result in unintended results as to the type of business or whatever that we're presented with. And I don't know the answer to that, so I'm not asking it rhetorically, and I don't know if the city attorney wants to comment on that, but that would just be my only reservation with respect to that. Thank you.
Commissioner Grignani?
Yes, I'm not in any way, by what I said, advocating for interspersing commercial out in, out from our town center or on every corner of the residential areas. I'm, I guess, more applying this to the commercial areas and the industrial areas rather than, necessarily what can go in the residential areas. In town center, that's a little bit different story, but in the suburban and the NU districts, I am not advocating for allowing commercial or retail opportunities in those areas. Just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
And I'll admit I'm speaking strictly on town center also. I mean, I don't live out in the suburban or non-urban areas, so I won't speak to that. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to pop up, but like Commissioner Grignani said, I think there'd be a whole lot more opposition out there than there would be in the town center.
Councilman Werther?
Thank you. Let's, if you don't mind, let's also extend that to the residential areas so that we don't end up, say with high density apartments alongside 1 acre lot homes, something along those lines, just so we, again, keep, if we're going to talk about transitions to some degree, and that's one of the things that continues to come in my head, transitions are a big part of what we have to do as we go from district to district. And I think if we can facilitate that, that'd be a good thing. But we also have to be cognizant that we shouldn't be placing unlike uses alongside each other just because it's generalized. So,
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Any changes to the list of permitted and conditional uses within any of the R districts or the NU district would have to be consistent with the master plan and the descriptions of each of the land use categories. So I can guarantee you that Mr. Newbury, Ms. Arnett, and I will not be going off the rail, I promise.
Mayor Bolen?
Thank you. Just real quickly, I wanted to say that I completely agree with Councilmember Werther's comments relative to transitioning, and we're in fact seeing that with respect to the Town Center Update Committee and what our residents, I think, are asking for. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Vunich, any closing remarks?
Well, again, thank you for the input. Again, I've walked away with a lot of things to look at. One of the things I am going to provide you is the town center list of permitted activities. We'll get that to you tomorrow, so you can have that as a reference. Also, we're going to look at a couple of other communities that I think aren't obviously like Wildwood, but have some of the characteristics of Wildwood, and let you see what they do in terms of how they describe their permitted and conditional uses. Just as a reference point, certainly something that you may not want to emulate or with the department. And then finally, I'll ask Mr. Newbury if there's anybody in as an attendee that would like to speak. And then if not, just respectfully request a motion to close the public hearing.
Okay, Mr. Newbury. Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks for the reminder, Mr. Chair and Kathy. We do have two folks in attendance tonight's meeting, so if we could just give them the opportunity or the time to raise their hand if they'd like to address the commission. And I'm not seeing any raised hands, so.
Right. Okay. I'll entertain a motion to close this public hearing. Councilman Worther, second by Commissioner Beatty. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, public hearing is closed.
Thank you.
So we have one item for old business. Mr. Newbury, are you reading PZ 2-20?
Yes, sir. PZ 2-20, Matthew and Sandra Witt, 5 Monarch Hill Court, Wildwood, Missouri, 63005, care of Sun Solar, Erica Irwin, 2531 North Patterson Avenue, Springfield, Missouri, 65803. A request for a conditional use permit in the NU non-urban residence district, street address 5 Monarch Hill Court, locator number 19X640135, for the installation of ground-mounted solar panels upon this 3.89 acre parcel of land, which is located on the west side of Monarch Hill Court, north of Wild Horse Creek Road. This request is to be reviewed in accordance with Chapter 415.090 NU Non-Urban Residence District Regulations of the City of Wildwood Zoning Ordinance, which establishes standards and requirements for the installation of solar panels. The requested permit is required due to the proposed solar panels being of a ground-mounted design type, Ward 1.
I'm going to have to do that. Thank you, Mr. Newbury. Mr. Vunich.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Department of Planning has prepared for your consideration tonight its draft letter of recommendation that reflects the action of the members at its last meeting this month. The Planning and Zoning Commission was presented a recommendation by the department 2 weeks ago regarding this installation of ground-mounted solar panels. After discussion, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended and granted the conditional use permit under several conditions. Tonight, in the letter of recommendation and under the urging of Mr. Newbury, we have created a separate sheet of those conditions to make it easier for the Planning and Zoning Commission, city officials, and the property owners to understand the requirements that are expected of them in association with this installation. I just want to highlight that in Attachment B, conditions, we've attempted to address all of the requirements set forth as part of the discussion of this topic by the members. I do note that we have compliance to all regulations relating to litter, debris, and storage of items on property. We've added information relating to the batteries, their proper disposal, and a 10-year time frame for review to ensure if the solar panels are not functioning, we know how they are addressed and how they are disposed of through that review process. We've also added information relating to the fire and first responders, as well as the electrical code. Finally, we have memorialized the landscaping requirement that is identified on 2 locations associated with the subject lot. And the department believes we've addressed those items identified by the Planning and Zoning Commission. We hope you concur If not, before a motion is made, we would respectfully request any additional input. And if there are, with or without additional input, eventually the department would respectfully request a motion and second to approve the draft letter of recommendation, so it could be forwarded on to City Council for their action. Mr. Chair, I would respectfully request the floor be open for discussion or a motion accepted. Thank you.
Okay, I'll open this up for discussion. Commissioner Helfrey.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for that attachment B, because for me that it makes it very clear, easy to understand, and so I appreciate that tremendously. And the only question I have is for number 7, when we gave the CUP a period of 10 years, was that due to the, did we come up with that number because that's usually what the battery life is?
That's my recollection, but I would defer to Commissioner Jackson. It was one of the items that he discussed and brought to the attention of the department.
Okay, thank you.
That was correct. They generally last anywhere from 12 to 14 years. I think the commission settled on 10 for testing. And as Commissioner Lee or Chairman Lee pointed out earlier, as we go through the whole process of the whole renewable energy policy, or if you will, that we talked about earlier, we need to think about a whole lot of other general maintenance issues as well moving forward. But that was it. That was the right recollection, Joe.
Commissioner Cohn.
Okay, I had some concerns about the 10-year time frame. As we move forward, technology is going to improve. Battery life will be extended. And it just seems, in my mind, that on a 10-year review, if everything's fine in year 12, it breaks down. How do we address that? And also, not all solar panels have battery backup. So how do we enforce the 10-year review? And what happens if there's an issue in year 12 or year 5?
Very good question. Very good question, sir. And pardon me, Mr. Chair, I started without your permission. Well, certainly we have established in certain instances in regards to conditional use permits, reviews, renewals, etc. We do it on a larger span of time after the initial granting of the conditional use permit, and we could go to yearly reviews if you should choose. I think that probably isn't appropriate in a residential setting with a property owner associated with their dwelling. So we could certainly make the review period less, but I wouldn't make it yearly. I don't believe it's necessary. I think many of the manufacturers of solar panels do a very good job of ensuring that they are, they work and aren't prone to, let's say, non-functioning. So we could do that. We can set the initial period at any time frame we want. We could have yearly renewals to track it after 10. So that's an option. What happens if it breaks before or after that review period? That's a very good question. I guess what I'm saying is we can't cover all instances, and we count on our residents to understand the importance of not taking risk, not putting the environment in harm. So part of it is a trust factor.
Is it possible?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it possible, since the owner of the solar array and to a certain point is selling electric back to the grid, that there could be established a relationship with Ameren, that if they see an anomaly in the operation of solar panels, that would trigger something for the Wildwood City to look into?
Mr. Chair, with your permission.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Vintage.
Ameren, Missouri has assisted us in some instances when we have issues with unauthorized occupancies. So it would not be out of the realm of possibility that we could ask them. I would probably need a couple of weeks to get that answer. So I wouldn't be able to tell you tonight with any assurity if we could or couldn't, which means we would have to postpone action tonight for me to provide you with, to address your question.
Any other discussion points? Or I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I just had a thought. I apologize.
Go ahead.
As part of the motion, if the commission would be confident enough, you could say, if Ameren, Missouri would notify us, we could add that into the attachment B. If they wouldn't, then we would not include it. So I guess what I'm saying is if the commission feels strongly that's a good approach, we could add wording that says, if it's allowed, we will. If it's not, we won't.
I don't know. My thought on this, Joe, is that if the system expires in 10 years and the people for some reason have no funds to replace it or even dismantle it, that they just might turn it off and just let it sit there. I can see that happening if the cost of, disposing this is very expensive. They can just let it sit and fall apart like an old barn, type thing. So you would never know after 10 years what was going to happen on it unless another 10 years transpired.
Well, certainly if they let it become a nuisance or an eyesore, we have property maintenance codes, so we could address it then. We do have some tools, just I don't know, again, how to respond to Mr. Cohen's question, because if it happens sooner or later than the review period, we may not know, quite frankly.
Commissioner Helfrey?
So Joe, this 10-year period, is this just specific to this particular approval? That's not a standard that we have established yet within the city. Is that correct?
That's correct, ma'am. This would be the first of the solar panels authorized by a conditional use permit to have a time frame associated with it. But it would be something we could look at under the item that was at public hearing.
So then, in essence, at the end of 10 years, we then, when they come back in front of us again, we could then say, since this system is 10 years old, now we need to see it every year, unless we address that particular issue in our legislation that we were talking about, which I would add that to your list of to-dos, would be to how do we address an aging system? Because, quite honestly, they could sell the house in year 9, and then the new people that buy the house, then what?
I actually like the direction of addressing it as part of the underlying regulations and following the direction of the chair, then making it part of that page on our website, making it part of the FAQs that we generate. So people know that just because of the permits granted and you install, there's still a responsibility that follows you as long as the solar panels and the arrays are there.
Thank you.
Commissioner Grignani?
I would agree with Mr. Vunich's and Ms. Helfrey's assessment of that. I think that not only should be true of the ground mounted ones, but the roof mounted ones also that are out there. Yeah, there's a lot of them that are on the backside of a house, but they're still probably visible from some roadway somewhere. And, if they're sitting up there and they're not functional anymore, for years and years, they could become real eyesores. Thank you.
Commissioner Jackson?
I can't remember. We bought our house here 7 years ago. Is there a Wildwood permit process when our inspection process, when a home is sold?
Nope.
No, sir, we do not have a residential reoccupancy inspection requirement.
That might be a consideration if a home is sold and there's solar or anything else, as a matter of fact. That could be inspected at that time, and then any upkeep would be on one party or the other. You know where I'm going. When you're building your policy, I would think about that. But if there isn't, I don't know what the recourse is.
It's
Yeah,
actually identified in our master plan as a recommendation for the future. We just have never had the support to implement it.
Mr. Vunish, doesn't the county deal with all building permit aspects? So this would be one of the functions that they would have to look at from
Yes,
an
sir.
electric safety standpoint.
Yes, sir. And they also, I believe, have the fire districts involved.
Mayor Boleyn?
This is, given that this is the first one of these that the commission will be approving and hearing the different questions and thoughts from the commissioners, I'm going to move to postpone this to the next meeting of the commission to give the director of planning time to sort through some of the questions, very good questions and issues that have been raised, just to make certain that there's nothing we need to change in regard to what's been proposed. I don't think a delay of a few weeks would be significant, and so I'll make the motion to postpone for that reason.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor to postpone. Is there a second? Commissioner Helfrey, second. Mr. Vunich, do you want to say anything? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and vote on the motion.
No, sir. Again, just some good suggestions, and Mr. Newbury, Ms. Arnett, and I will do our best to get answers and have it ready for you at the next meeting.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to postpone. This will be a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions. We're postponed for 2 weeks. Moving on, I think that was the last item that we had. Does the department have any closing remarks?
Well,
Mayor Boleyn, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You're on mute.
I can go after the department, that's okay.
Okay. Mr. Vunich.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to thank you all for attending tonight, your service to the city. As I often say, we can't do it without you, so your role is very important.
Thank you. Mayor Boleyn.
Thank you. Just a point of personal privilege, Mr. Chairman. I want to take this opportunity to thank Commissioner Greg Nani for her service on the commission. Her term that I appointed her to in 2016 actually expires with this meeting, and she's been part of this group for 11 years, and I really appreciate her service. As you may know, the residents approved a few years ago 2-term limits for appointed officials, which in this case is 8 years, and I've applied that consistently with respect to that mandate, and we'll be doing the same here. So I know that you all join with me in thanking her for her 11 years of service on this commission. So thank you, Fran, for that.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Good deal. Okay. I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Commissioner Helfrey, and a second from Councilman Depp or Werther. Sorry, Cindy, I almost got you there.
I'm not a councilman.
Yeah, Tim beat you by a half a second.
No worries.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you very much.
Thank you all again. Have a nice Memorial Day holiday.
Mhm.
I just want to say I miss seeing you all. So, see ya.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone.